You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com.
In modern Russia, one individual commands more concern from President Vladimir Putin than any other. This man wears many identities. He acts as a political agitator, an online personality, and a calculated disruptor. He embraces digital tools like sweeping aerial drone footage to reveal hidden truths buried beneath Russia's surface of official stories and public images. The core aim remains clear: to offer the Russian people and observers worldwide a clear look behind the official curtain to reveal the intricate network of corruption, bribery, and hidden power that underpins the Russian state. The person dedicated to this mission is Alexei Navalny, recently sentenced to 3 years in prison after surviving an attempt on his life by poisoning. Despite the attack, his name was placed in consideration for a Nobel Peace Prize. The momentum he has built deeply unsettles President Vladimir Putin, and the unfolding story demonstrates why. Alexei Navalny, recognized across Russia as a major opposition figure, found himself in a hotel room in the eastern city of Tomsk, preparing to board a flight back to Moscow. At the airport, fellow travelers spotted him and captured photos. The flight departed, and for the first portion of the 4-hour journey, conditions remained ordinary. Roughly 30 minutes in, Navalny began to experience sharp, inexplicable pain. Although he declined water offered by a flight attendant, his condition deteriorated rapidly. As pain turned to agony, he sought refuge in the aircraft's lavatory, where he drifted in and out of consciousness, showing signs of seizure and cardiac distress. A nurse among the passengers intervened to help keep him stable, as the pilots diverted to the nearest airport for an emergency landing. Upon arrival, medics rushed aboard, but determined that Navalny required immediate intensive care beyond what they could deliver on the runway. Navalny was transported to a nearby hospital where physicians began diagnostic tests. Yet when lab results appeared, they showed no signs of abnormality, suggesting only minor stomach issues, despite Navalny displaying textbook signs of poisoning. Suspicion rose when the test results contradicted his obvious symptoms. Acting on medical intuition, the doctors ignored the official lab report and initiated emergency treatment for poisoning. Navalny was placed on a ventilator and induced into a coma to protect his body, while antidotes and supportive care were administered. As Navalny lay unconscious in intensive care, hospital corridors filled not only with medical staff, but with state security officers and government officials. These agents restricted access to Navalny's loved ones and personal doctor, intensifying the family's sense of peril within the state-controlled hospital walls. A German humanitarian organization intervened, offering a medical evacuation flight to transfer Navalny to Berlin for unbiased treatment. Navalny was moved aboard the evacuation aircraft and flown to Germany, where fresh blood analyses revealed what the Russian lab reports concealed. Navalny had indeed been poisoned. German toxicologists identified the agent as a nerve toxin known as Novichok, a compound engineered by Soviet-era scientists during the Cold War to incapacitate or silently kill targets. Novichok inflicts paralysis, neurological damage, cardiac slowing, and seizures. Its production remains confined to the Russian military and intelligence community, making its presence an unmistakable signature of state involvement. Navalny stayed in a Berlin intensive care unit, locked in a coma while medical teams worked to reverse the toxin's effects and piece together the circumstances of the attempted assassination. To understand why such extraordinary measures were taken to silence Navalny, one must understand his relentless mission. For years, Navalny's life's work focused on revealing how modern Russia operates, not through official government offices alone, but through an invisible hierarchy maintained by vast wealth, mutual favors, and a culture of bribery. At the top sits Vladimir Putin, sustained not by iron-fisted dictatorship alone, but by the loyalty of powerful billionaires who own stakes in oil, gas, mining, and telecommunications. These oligarchs benefit from laws bent in their favor and, in turn, protect Putin's political survival. Navalny threatens this fragile balance by pulling back the curtain with digital exposés that blend investigative reporting, drone imagery, and sharp-edged commentary. His videos dissect the secret lifestyles and illegal transactions of Russia's elite, exposing hidden mansions, luxury yachts, and shadowy corporate deals. Unlike traditional political opponents, Navalny does not chase votes for himself, but incites ordinary Russians to question why they accept a system designed to enrich the few at the cost of the many. Navalny's storytelling relies on digital strategy and open ridicule. His online documentaries mock the lavish lifestyles of corrupt officials, often starting with absurd, embarrassing clips that draw viewers in before pivoting to detailed, evidence-rich segments built on documents, drone flyovers, and leaked plans. In one such production, Navalny's team deployed inflatable rafts and drones to capture high-resolution images of an extravagant coastal palace on the Black Sea, rumored to benefit Putin personally despite officially belonging to wealthy proxies. Animations overlay the drone footage, highlighting underground ice rinks, casinos, and hidden tunnels, revealing excess far beyond any official salary's reach. The effect is potent. Each exposé travels quickly online, generating millions of views and mobilizing protests in cities across Russia. The Kremlin's courts remain immune to such revelations, but the real danger for Putin is that ordinary people might withdraw support for a system exposed as serving oligarchs above citizens. Navalny's trolling does not stop at videos. In a stunning maneuver, still recovering in Berlin, Navalny used call spoofing software to pose as a senior security official and phoned a Russian intelligence agent. Exploiting the agent's confusion, Navalny extracted a confession detailing how operatives smeared the nerve poison on his undergarments in his Tomsk hotel. Despite the near-fatal attempt on his life, Navalny returned to Moscow, defying expectations that he would remain in exile. Within moments of landing, Russian authorities arrested him for allegedly breaching parole terms from prior fabricated charges, despite the impossibility of fulfilling parole duties while lying unconscious in a foreign intensive care unit. Navalny's return coincided with the release of his most ambitious documentary yet. The film, final edits completed while he recovered, focused entirely on Putin's personal circle and the hidden assets protecting his rule. Navalny made sure its release date fell immediately after his return to Russia, ensuring maximum attention. The video soared to over 110 million views, igniting new protests. In Moscow's streets, demonstrators demanded Navalny's freedom, only to be met by riot police detaining thousands, including lawyers and journalists. Inside a glass cage, Navalny faced a sham trial. His sentence, 2 years and 8 months, reinforced a regime determined to preserve its pyramid of wealth and favors by silencing those who reveal its true structure. Navalny's goal has never been to ascend the presidential throne. Instead, it remains rooted in encouraging Russians to see the invisible framework that holds their government together. If that framework collapses, Putin's control collapses with it. While oligarchs may vanish into offshore havens, Putin would stand alone as the figurehead of decades of corruption. In the face of this threat, the Kremlin intensifies its tactics, leaning on propaganda, staged photo opportunities, and brutal crackdowns to maintain power. The question that now hangs in the air is not whether Alexei Navalny will emerge as Russia's leader. Rather, the world watches to see whether his revelations will build enough momentum to push Russians to reclaim power from a system built on secrecy, wealth, and intimidation. The story of Alexei Navalny's clash with the Russian state does not exist in isolation. It sits within a broader strategy employed by Vladimir Putin to preserve authority and suppress dissent. While Navalny lay unconscious in Berlin, the Russian president continued to cultivate his carefully crafted image as a rugged, unchallengeable leader. One element of this strategy has long been visual theater, striking public appearances that reinforce a persona of strength and vitality. Carefully staged moments of Putin bare-chested on horseback or dominating professional hockey games function as symbolic messages, reassuring loyalists and warning adversaries alike that the figure atop the pyramid remains untouchable. However, staged photo opportunities alone cannot secure an entire power structure. Putin's broader popularity is also maintained through policies that deliver stability and modest prosperity to everyday Russians. This foundation of basic economic contentment and managed nationalism keeps his approval ratings resilient, even as stories of corruption swirl online. Navalny's digital exposés threaten this delicate balance by showing audiences how state resources fund unimaginable luxury for a tight circle of billionaires, while ordinary citizens see modest returns. Behind every extravagant palace and private vineyard exposed by Navalny's videos lies a deeper point. The same oligarchs who accumulate these privileges help keep Putin in power. They depend on him to protect their businesses from legal scrutiny and competition, and in exchange, they support the political environment that lets them thrive unchecked. Should the Russian population become convinced that their leaders and corporate magnates operate more like a mafia than public servants, the entire house of cards risks collapse. Navalny's methodical revelations and well-produced online documentaries are therefore more dangerous than any single opposition candidate's political campaign. Navalny's influence also reflects a generational shift in how dissent spreads inside Russia. While traditional opposition movements often struggled to reach broad audiences under state-controlled television and newspapers, Navalny's content bypasses censors through social media and encrypted messaging apps. His investigations travel across Russian social platforms and reach millions of younger Russians who have grown up online and can instantly share, translate, and remix his work. Each viral documentary strikes at two pillars of the Kremlin's power: secrecy and fear. By demystifying how bribes flow and luxury properties are hidden, Navalny erodes secrecy. By mocking the powerful through satirical commentary and brash digital stunts, he erodes fear. When millions witness these exposés and see no immediate punishment for simply watching or sharing them, they become more willing to question the system publicly, or gather in the streets when Navalny himself is threatened. Back in Berlin, Navalny's recovery became another testament to his defiance. Doctors treated the severe nerve damage inflicted by Novichok poisoning. Regaining the ability to walk required physical therapy and time, but throughout his recovery, Navalny's team continued to edit and prepare the next wave of revelations. Even in a hospital bed, Navalny remained an active disruptor of the Kremlin's secrets. When Navalny's plane touched down on Russian soil after his return flight from Germany, state officials wasted no time showing the population the price of open defiance. Detained within minutes, Navalny was separated from his wife with a brief farewell. Official charges pointed to parole violations from a long-discredited court case. Yet the reality, visible to the world, was that Navalny's real crime in the eyes of the Kremlin was refusing exile and continuing to pull back the curtain on the country's concealed wealth network. Outside the courtroom, Navalny's supporters flooded Moscow's streets. Footage showed police clad in riot gear pushing back crowds and dragging away demonstrators. Journalists captured images of lawyers being arrested in broad daylight, signaling the state's determination to silence not only Navalny, but also anyone seeking to defend him publicly. Inside the courtroom, Navalny stood behind glass, facing a process already decided in advance. He exchanged glances with his wife, seated among the onlookers, a quiet sign that his fight continued despite the spectacle intended to humiliate and isolate him. His prison sentence of nearly 3 years momentarily stabilized the fragile pyramid that sustains Putin's power. But the cracks remain, visible in each frame of Navalny's documentaries and amplified by every new viewer who chooses to question the status quo rather than accept state narratives. Navalny's mission, unlike traditional political ambitions, does not revolve around becoming Russia's next president. His vision aims instead at dismantling the entire structure by persuading Russians that they deserve more than a government engineered for the enrichment of the few. His weapon is transparency. His method is ridicule. And his battlefield is a digital landscape where state censors struggle to keep pace with millions of smartphones and viral posts. What remains uncertain is how long the Kremlin can contain this threat. For every arrest and show trial, each drone video and confession prank plants new seeds of doubt in the minds of everyday Russians. The longer Navalny's words and images travel freely, the more difficult it becomes to preserve the illusions that keep the oligarchs loyal and the public compliant. Alexei Navalny's return to Russia, knowing arrest was inevitable, transformed his imprisonment into yet another lens through which Russians and the international community could witness how the Kremlin sustains its rule through intimidation and spectacle. The paradox of Navalny's trial lay in its blatant contradiction. The state insisted on punishing him for failing to comply with parole requirements linked to charges already discredited as politically motivated, all while ignoring the obvious reason he could not report, recovering from an assassination attempt that bore the unmistakable fingerprints of Russian state operatives. For ordinary Russians watching the courtroom drama unfold on state television and uncensored online clips, the message was double-edged. On one side, the authorities displayed their power to detain and silence any figure who dared to challenge the existing arrangement. On the other, the raw brazenness of the process exposed the fragility of the narrative that the state operates on principles of law and order. Navalny's supporters saw a man caged for revealing uncomfortable truths rather than for committing any legitimate crime. Outside the courtroom, demonstrations swept through Russia's cities. Protesters braved the frigid streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg, standing shoulder to shoulder with banners and chants calling for Navalny's freedom and denouncing state corruption. Police units clad in dark riot gear countered the crowds with force. Video footage of protesters dragged through snowbanks and buses packed with detained students and journalists fueled Navalny's message more than any speech could have. The state's answer to these scenes was a playbook familiar to authoritarian governments worldwide. Tight control of traditional media, selective internet blackouts, and intimidation of families and employers to discourage dissent. Yet, Navalny's movement had grown beyond any single video or demonstration. The question was no longer just about one man's freedom. It had become a question of whether ordinary Russians would accept a future scripted entirely by oligarchs and the political class that shields them. Navalny's team had anticipated this moment long before his poisoning. While he lay in a coma in Berlin, editors and investigators continued assembling what would become one of the most impactful pieces of digital journalism in Russian history, an extended documentary focused directly on Vladimir Putin's hidden empire. Navalny's videos had always targeted the lower levels of Russia's power pyramid, exposing regional governors and lesser oligarchs. This time, the spotlight rose to the summit. Released immediately after his arrest, the documentary dissected a sprawling palace complex on the shores of the Black Sea. Footage captured by Navalny's team showed miles of secured coastline, lavish architecture, underground hockey rinks, casinos, vineyards, all maintained through a web of shell companies and trusted billionaires acting as fronts. Drone shots revealed manicured grounds and private theaters that surpassed anything built for official state use. Blueprints leaked by construction contractors confirmed hidden floors and escape tunnels, architectural proof of a private domain designed to hide its true beneficiary. The palace film struck at the image Putin had spent decades cultivating, the patriotic, modest leader who embodied Russian resilience. Images of the hidden palace directly contradicted official claims that Putin lived modestly and owned little more than a small apartment. Navalny's investigators connected the palace's upkeep to funds laundered through state contracts and oligarch-owned corporations, illustrating in fine detail how a system designed to serve the public funneled resources upward to a single, lavishly secured estate. For millions of viewers, the message was unavoidable. Each frame drew a line between the oil rigs, gas pipelines, and tax ruble that powered Russia's economy and the gilded walls and private casinos that shielded its leader from accountability. With subtitles, dubbed segments, and endless reposts, the documentary spread beyond Russia's borders, viewed by people across Europe, Asia, and the Americas who might otherwise only encounter Putin's stage-managed appearances at summits and military parades. The Kremlin's response was swift but clumsy. Official spokespeople labeled the palace a fabrication, blaming wealthy businessmen and dismissing any link to Putin. State television parroted these denials, yet the visuals spoke louder. Satellite images, leaked invoices, contractor testimonies, all too numerous to disappear from the internet overnight, made it impossible to bury the evidence completely. The consequences for Navalny were immediate. His prison term secured him behind bars, where his communications would be monitored and restricted. For his family, lawyers, and digital team, the threats multiplied. Law enforcement raided offices, seized servers, and detained volunteers distributing flyers. Yet the documentary lived on. Every takedown notice sparked re-uploads on new channels. Supporters mirrored the video onto foreign servers. Even tech-savvy Russian teenagers circulated excerpts in messaging apps beyond the reach of state censors. Navalny's symbolic power only grew. He had transformed a small opposition network into a nationwide conversation that no show trial could contain. By stepping back onto Russian soil and refusing exile, Navalny forced the Kremlin to show the extremes it would reach to silence one man's investigation. In doing so, he demonstrated to the Russian public that the most dangerous threat to the president's control was not foreign sanctions or rival politicians, but millions of ordinary citizens waking up to the hidden world financed by their labor and taxes. Navalny's arrest and the viral power of the Palace documentary marked a turning point that could not be reversed by the Kremlin's familiar playbook. The protest waves that followed showed that for many Russians, the revelations were not just about a single building by the Black Sea, but a visible reminder of a much larger betrayal. The palace symbolized every missing hospital budget, every crumbling rural road, every unpaid pension, a concrete image to link abstract corruption to daily life. Inside prison walls, Navalny remained isolated physically, but impossible to silence digitally. His team, trained to operate with minimal contact, continued to release investigations, publish footage, and coordinate local chapters who organized grassroots political activities and small protests, even as arrests and intimidation escalated. This decentralized approach turned Navalny's network into something the state found far harder to extinguish than a single leader. Young volunteers, tech-savvy students, and frustrated middle-class professionals began to see themselves not just as passive audiences, but as participants in a slow, deliberate campaign to break the culture of fear. Navalny's exposés armed them with facts and shareable evidence: blueprints, invoices, drone footage, official records buried in complicated real estate transfers. This information gave people the tools to argue with skeptical relatives, neighbors, or coworkers who believed state propaganda. Meanwhile, the Kremlin tightened its grip. State-controlled media increased coverage portraying Navalny as a Western puppet, a troublemaker, sowing chaos on behalf of foreign intelligence services. New laws expanded definitions of treason and terrorism to criminalize routine political activism. Social media platforms came under greater pressure to remove extremist content, often defined as any material related to Navalny or his foundation. Despite these countermeasures, the truth embedded in millions of phones could not be deleted outright. Navalny's allies found ways to slip information through the cracks. Mirrored sites, encrypted messaging channels, and digital flash drives passed hand to hand. In provincial cities, where Navalny's team had once struggled to find supporters, small local chapters began sharing evidence of regional corruption that connected directly to the larger pyramid he had described for years. Inside prison, Navalny faced harsh conditions designed to break his resolve and send a signal to anyone thinking of following his example. Reports emerged of extended solitary confinement, sleep deprivation tactics, and repeated punishments for trivial infractions like unbuttoned uniforms. Despite this, short statements and letters smuggled through lawyers or family reached the public, reminding supporters that the mission remained unchanged: to expose how wealth and power were traded behind closed doors at the expense of the nation's future. Navalny's resolve and the determination of his team reframed him not as a conventional politician, but as a living symbol of resistance to the culture of secrecy and submission. Internationally, the Palace documentary and the poisoning attempt redefined how global audiences perceived Vladimir Putin's Russia. Sanctions expanded, foreign leaders issued statements, but for Navalny's movement, external pressure was never the main goal. The real battlefield stayed inside Russia, in schools, kitchen tables, and city squares, where people argued whether a leader deserved palaces and secret accounts, while citizens settled for shrinking wages and rising prices. Even under growing surveillance, the Navalny network innovated ways to keep the conversation alive. Activists organized local elections monitoring, crowdfunded independent journalism, and trained citizens on digital security to outmaneuver censorship. Meanwhile, fresh investigations emerged targeting new figures: mid-level bureaucrats, mayors, corporate managers, illustrating that corruption was not limited to distant oligarchs, but touched daily services, taxes, and jobs in every region. The larger narrative became impossible to ignore. The Kremlin's power depended not on unshakable loyalty or total control, but on a careful balancing act maintained by intimidation, selective rewards, and a population convinced it had no alternative. Navalny's relentless disclosures challenged that calculation, one link, document, and drone video at a time. Navalny's impact, magnified by the Palace documentary and sustained by a decentralized network, pressed a simple, dangerous question deeper into Russia's public life. What if ordinary citizens stopped fearing the system designed to keep them obedient? Each investigation peeled back another layer of the same house of cards structure, showing how bribes moved, which companies hid wealth, which regional officials siphoned public funds for lavish homes and secret estates. For supporters, the image of Navalny standing in a courtroom cage or confined to a penal colony did not signal defeat. Instead, it turned him into living proof that truth-telling could rattle the walls of power more than any outside pressure or military threat. The Kremlin's traditional methods of containment, control of broadcast news, intimidation of protesters, show trials, remained powerful tools, but they met an opponent operating with tactics impossible to cage completely. By refusing exile, Navalny made himself a test. Would Russians allow a man to be poisoned, silenced, and buried behind bars for exposing facts? Would they allow the same pyramid of billionaires and security agents to decide what information they could see and share? With each passing month, the cost of suppressing the truth grew heavier for the state. In the years that followed the Palace expose, Navalny's team multiplied their methods. They pushed new videos highlighting local corruption, small-time regional governors with hidden foreign real estate, mid-level bureaucrats with sports cars and secret villas, police generals whose families suddenly owned multi-million-dollar apartments. Each video repeated the same theme in new voices. Corruption was not an exception, but the system's foundation. The Kremlin's pushback became more aggressive and visible. Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation was labeled an extremist organization, placing its volunteers, donors, and even social media followers at risk of criminal charges. Offices were raided, computers seized, supporters harassed. Tech giants faced threats of fines and shutdowns if they refused to block content. But the decentralized nature of Navalny's network made a full purge impossible. Small groups sprung up in new cities, sometimes operating under new names, using secure apps to share files, hold meetings, and plan local actions. Outside Russia, Navalny's story reshaped diplomatic relations. Governments that once balanced economic ties with muted criticism found themselves pushed to react. Economic sanctions targeted oligarchs linked to Kremlin corruption. Banks faced pressure to investigate hidden assets, yet Navalny's movement insisted that Western responses were secondary. Real change, they argued, would only come if Russians inside the country demanded it themselves. Inside prison, Navalny's survival became a quiet daily battle. Health crises, isolation, and harsh work detail all signaled that his captors hoped time and mistreatment would wear him down. Still, messages continued to reach the outside world. Handwritten notes passed through lawyers, courtroom remarks broadcast in snippets by international reporters. Each word reminded supporters that the larger fight was not about a single name, but about whether truth could break a cycle of fear. For Putin, the cost of that truth turned into a dilemma with no clean exit. Releasing Navalny risked emboldening others. Keeping him locked away required ever more visible repression. The same palace that once symbolized hidden luxury now symbolized a ruler trapped by the secrets it exposed. The higher the walls rose around Navalny's prison, the clearer it became how fragile the illusion of total control really was. Navalny's imprisonment hardened him into more than an opposition figure. He became a constant reminder that the story of modern Russia could no longer be contained behind official news reports or state-controlled narratives. The videos, documents, and confessions his network released when courtrooms locked him behind glass or prison guards confined him to solitary cells. They multiplied each time someone shared a clip, mirrored a file, or passed a flash drive to a neighbor. Inside Russia, ordinary people learned how to navigate the state's tightening digital barriers. Parents taught teenagers how to install virtual private networks. Teachers quietly slipped links to trusted channels. Tech workers coded mirror sites when authorities blocked domains overnight. Each time the Kremlin expanded its toolkit of censorship, the Navalny network and millions of quiet supporters found new cracks to slip the same questions through. Where does the money come from? Who really owns these estates? How do secret wealth, hidden contracts, and private palaces keep a single leader secure? Navalny's survival under brutal conditions turned his every word and image into an act of resistance. Grainy photographs of him behind prison glass or brief statements read in rushed courtroom appearances traveled instantly to screens worldwide. Even stripped of physical freedom, his image reappeared in street graffiti, social media memes, coded references slipped into songs and jokes. The more the state erased him from official headlines, the larger he became in the spaces the Kremlin could not fully police. Encrypted chats, digital classrooms, hushed conversations on park benches and kitchen tables. His team understood that the most powerful weapon was not the leader himself, but the method. Radical transparency wrapped in plain evidence that anyone could verify. Exposés about regional bribes and secret real estate schemes continued under new local faces who embraced the same model. Documents, drone shots, quiet witnesses willing to leak invoices and building plans. Each new story connected to the same simple truth Navalny had risked his life to show: that the system's wealth and power rested on a vast agreement to keep people ignorant, distracted, and intimidated. Break that agreement, and the pyramid trembled. Outside Russia, Navalny's case reshaped how other governments handled Russian wealth abroad. Investigative journalists and financial watchdogs uncovered foreign bank accounts, hidden yachts, and offshore estates tied to Kremlin allies who had once stashed fortunes far from Moscow's reach. Western capitals that had once welcomed Russian capital with quiet nods and discreet banking rules now faced mounting pressure to freeze assets, tighten sanctions, and ask tougher questions. Yet Navalny's team made clear that no amount of foreign punishment could substitute for what really mattered: Russians inside Russia choosing to see and share the truth. International headlines could not replace millions of small conversations in apartments, factory break rooms, or crowded subway cars. For Navalny, the goal was never a single election win, but the slow dismantling of a culture that told people they were powerless to challenge those who ruled over them with palaces they could never visit. His story, poisoned, imprisoned, silenced by force, never promised a clear or quick ending. Instead, it left behind a question larger than his own fate. Would Russia's people accept that the pyramid could only stand as long as they refused to see its foundation? Would they risk saying out loud what Navalny had written, filmed, and shouted across every drone flight and courtroom cage? Would the sight of one palace be enough to remind millions that the walls built to protect it were never meant to protect them? Navalny's enduring fight left Russia facing a mirror it could not easily turn away from. Each new investigation layered another crack across the myth that the Kremlin's control was absolute and unshakable. Even as Navalny sat in a prison cell far from Moscow, his team's documentaries continued to appear, pieced together by young editors in small apartments, distributed by volunteers who risked fines, interrogations, and blacklists. For the people who watched, reposted, or whispered about these revelations, the palace by the Black Sea was not just a building. It was a sign that power in Russia served a tiny circle while asking everyone else to pretend it did not. Each drone flyover, each leaked blueprint, each hidden bank transfer became a small act of collective memory, proof that wealth meant for schools, roads, and pensions had been rerouted to secret estates and sprawling vineyards. In Moscow, the government's response grew sharper each year. Censorship laws widened to make almost any mention of Navalny's name a legal risk. Social media moderators faced threats of huge fines if they failed to erase content fast enough. New technology filtered search results, choked access to messaging apps, or slowed entire sites until they flickered out of reach. But the simple mechanics of Navalny's method, ordinary people passing along evidence, watching videos in private, asking uncomfortable questions, slipped past every firewall the Kremlin could build. Internationally, Navalny's poisoning and the palace film forced foreign leaders to treat corruption not just as a Russian problem, but as a network stretching into European real estate, Caribbean tax shelters, and luxury streets from London to Dubai. Frozen accounts, seized yachts, closed bank loopholes followed in the wake of each revelation. Yet Navalny's message always circled back to the place where real change had to begin: inside Russia. Among those whose wages filled the accounts of oil companies and telecom empires, whose taxes paved the roads that ended at private gates guarded by silent security. In prison, Navalny's voice, though limited to smuggled notes and rare statements through lawyers, never shifted in tone. He reminded his supporters that his story was never just about him. It was about the machinery of bribery and intimidation that held power in place, and the possibility that ordinary Russians might refuse to be frightened by it. He did not claim to be the solution, nor did he promise a clean ending. His documentaries, court speeches, and final message before imprisonment left the same idea behind. The system does not fall because of one man's exposé, but because enough people see it clearly and decide it must. The palace on the Black Sea still stands. The billionaires still gather at tables far from public view. The same guards patrol the gates, the same companies sign secret contracts. But across countless cities, small lights flicker in apartments where people remember the drone shots, the blueprints, the phone calls, and confessions that told a simple truth. This power only survives if no one dares to look directly at it for too long. Navalny's legacy is not a single protest or a viral film, but the proof that a culture of silence is not as unbreakable as it claims. And every Russian who whispers his name, watches another video, or shares a new investigation carries that proof forward, one piece of the pyramid shifting, waiting for the day when it can no longer hold its own weight.